I would say reading the Bible and reading the Qur'an will help you help you become an atheist more than a Christian or a Muslim, right?
Okay. Yeah, I hear this a lot. I ask a lot of people, you know, like when I meet atheists, to say, you know, how long have you taken these issues very seriously, and how long have you been debating these things? A lot of people say, you know, right after I read the Bible, and now I'm an atheist because I read the Bible.
Yeah.
So so I always ask them, like, what was it? What was the story, right? So do you have something in the Bible you think like that people would read that and then become an atheist?
Well, maybe not. They would become an atheist to the Christian God. I wouldn't say they would become an atheist all the way.
Just let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
Do you think that people read the Bible and then go, I don't like this guy? Or do you think they read the Bible and say, this guy can't exist?
I don't know how to statistic.
What do you think people,
what do you think people say? I think there are people that read it and they're like, what a horrible God this is.
Yes.
And that's an emotional response to it. And there's a logical response to it. People read it and they were like, this contradicts a just God.
Yeah, and that's
a logical
reaction.
reaction.
Those are two very different responses.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're kind of the same because emotionally we believe in just, we believe in kindness. Like, those are emotional things,
right.
And when we see things that contradict that, we don't believe it, and that is an emotional response. But you can see it as a logical response as well.
Yeah.
Because the idea of God is supposed to be a kind God, a merciful God, a just God, and that is not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible and the God of the Quran is a cruel God. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. The punishment and reward system is based on how much of a slave we are to that God, how much we love Him, how much we praise Him, how much we worship Him, more than anything else, more than yeah. So it's both logical and emotional, and I think they're both reasonable.
Yeah, I wanted to separate those as two different things because some people.
Let's focus on the logical one.
Okay.
Which is basically a just God can't be the God of the Quran and the God of the Bible, because those gods are by definition of every definition of the word kind, by every definition of the word just. The God of the Quran and the God of the Bible are not those. That's a contradiction, and not just because the crimes and the cruelty that they promote in this life, but mostly because the unjustness and the cruelty that they claim to commit in the afterlife, which is more of a big deal to me because that's supposed to be eternal, right? For example, when God says like, oh, stone a person to death because they did this, we're like, okay, that's cruel, but it's nothing compared to burning people for eternity. That's a bigger injustice when it comes to.
Well. Okay, I'll speak of this quickly, but stoning people, right, that would actually be a punishment for a crime, right?
Yeah.
And so that would actually show God's justice. He's calling for capital punishment on a certain crime.
Well, for a crime that is not that big of a deal sometimes.
Well, I don't know.
Based on most of the stonings in the Bible, I have committed those crimes. So
It's a good thing that you don't live in.
Well, yeah, I had
in that culture and in that time.
Yeah, I blasphemed, right?
That's a big deal.
Blasphemy
would be a big.
Well, me just saying there's no God, that's blasphemy.
Okay.
Or like one of the Ten Commandments. Every time I say, God damn it, right? Which commandment is that? You can't take the Lord's.
Yeah, man, it's a really big deal to do that, right?
You never said God damn it?
I'm sure.
You never said, God, like you never said that? Because if you said that, you're supposed to be stoned to death. That's one of the Ten Commandments.
I know, and so that's why I'm really happy there's grace, there's grace for me. Yeah, blasphemy or taking the Lord's name in vain is a really big deal, because if God does exist, right? If He does exist, He's created everything around us. He loves us. He's got a paradise awaiting for us, right? And He's really involved in our lives. And then we take the Creator of this world, who loves us, and we, throw His name out with the trash.
It's just a name.
if God exists, I hope that you can see that that's a really big deal. That's why.
No,
That's very offensive to Christians.
If like, no, how is it? Like, if you look at the Ten Commandments, the first 3 of them is about Him, right? This is a very self-obsessed God. And in fact,
but
one
I would
of the
say
Ten
that the Ten
Commandments,
Commandments, right, is about 2 things. It's about how to relate to God, and it's about how to relate to each other. And so.
Okay, how is this such a big deal? That's like, you're not supposed to draw the image of God. That's one of the 10 Commandments. Do you agree?
Don't make a graven image.
Yes. And based on Christianity, Jesus is God. So all these churches with the picture of Jesus.
Yeah, that's a common issue.
So all these churches are basically because they're drawing the picture of Jesus and because they have the statue of Jesus everywhere, they're committing a crime based on their own 10 Commandments, which apparently they have not read. In fact, if you ask most Christians, they don't know the 10 Commandments. 99.9% of Christians don't know the 10 Commandments.
I don't know about 99%,
I just made that up.
But I would say the same thing is true for Muslims, right? Like, I would say you could ask a Muslim what are the 5 pillars, and they probably know 2 of them.
More Muslims know about more Muslims know about Islam than Christians know about Christianity.
But let's go to the issue though. So the issue we're talking about quickly is the graven image idea. Like, to make it what we view that as is you don't make these because it's in response. Like, we have to remember that the Bible was written to a certain people at a certain time. We don't necessarily, those of us living today, that the Bible was written to us directly, but we believe that the Bible was written for us, right? And so, because for example, like the 10 Commandments were written to a people that were just coming out of Egypt, right? Mm-hmm. And it was a place where, like, you don't see many people today. It does exist today, but a lot of people bowing towards idols, right? Like these statues, and that they believe God dwells in that statue, right?
Yeah.
But that's where they're coming from. So when they're talking about graven images, what that's in response to is people who would worship these man-made idols, right?
So the 10 Commandments are not the universal for all time. For a timeless God.
What we view idols as, like, idols are a huge problem today. But you won't make a graven image of God, because if we were to try to draw God or to try to make a statue of what God looks like, it doesn't even make sense, right? But if we were to walk,
Jesus was God apparently.
Yeah, Jesus was a human being, but we don't really know what this guy looked like. We can't, like, look at the movies or the Passion of the Christ and go, well, yeah, Jesus was this white guy with, like, brown hair, and a very Roman features. No, he was a 1st century Jew, right?
Yeah.
And so, like I was saying, I was laughing with a friend of mine last night that, I've seen paintings of Jesus. I've seen a white Jesus. I was in a black church one time and I saw a black Jesus. And one time I was really shocked. I was in a Chinese church and actually I saw a Chinese Jesus. And so it's a big problem if we bow down and worship these images, right? Because that image isn't God, right?
Well, Christians do it all the time.
Well, I just would say that like, you should actually speak to these people about that. Like, like, statues and paintings aren't a big, like, I'm a Protestant, right? So, like, there's not a big part of my worship experience. But if we were to go to the Catholic Church,
based on God,
like,
what's the punishment for that, anyways? Based on the Bible, isn't that stoning? I know for taking the Lord's name in vain, the punishment for that is stoning. Mm-hmm. But what's the punishment for?
I don't know what the punishment would be for dying. Like, but you mean what the punishment was in that culture at that time?
But you're trying to make God sound a little bit more just by attributing some of the punishments for some crimes that we don't see as crimes today anymore. Saying, well, that just was for those people, for a specific place, for a specific time. Which we
still see them as crimes against God today. But we just see them as, like, like today, if I were to go down to a church and bow down towards a statue of Jesus, nobody's going to stone me, is what you mean, right?
Yeah.
But these were, when we look at these Old Testament laws and punishments, right, these are still very valid, These are not, we don't throw these out. But we have to understand that these were laws for Israel, right? This was God's chosen people, that anybody was free to leave anytime. Like, Israel was not some kind of prison with walled off borders. If people didn't want to live under the system, they could leave, right?
Yeah,
So
it's not that easy to leave a city. But
I agree, but the point is that these punishments were set up as a law of like how these people, because people in Israel actually had God at a point had God Himself as their king. They were a theocracy. Right?
So you're saying, for example, when God says if somebody's gay in the Bible, it says this. Okay, I don't know if you're going to reject this or not, but it says in the Bible that if somebody's gay, you're supposed to kill them, and their blood is on their own head.
Well, the Bible doesn't actually say that if someone is gay. It says that if somebody commits homosexual acts.
Okay, so you're allowed to be gay as long as you don't sleep with them.
Well, just at the time, there was no comprehension back then of people even being gay.
Oh, there was.
There was just comprehension of people committing homosexual acts.
It was. If you read Lot's story, an entire city is trying to have sex with the two male angels in his house. That's like a whole city of gay people.
What this was is like a lot of people still had families. They had a wife at home. They had children.
Well, gay people do these things.
I'm not saying that people weren't gay back then. I'm just saying that the comprehension is different. So you can't say that God is saying if people are gay you have to kill them. That's not what it's saying.
What is it
that Levitical law that you're talking about says that if like a man lies with another man as he lies with a woman, his blood will be on his own head. So
take their life, kill them, and their blood will be.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's setting up a system that's saying that homosexual acts are not permitted. It's saying nothing about somebody having homosexual feelings, or it's not if they're gay, kill them.
Okay, fine. If somebody.
I'm just trying to be clear.
All right. Yeah. Let's say not if you have a feeling, but if you commit a homosexual act based on the Bible, you should kill them.
If you're living in Israel at that time, yes.
That's what the law says. It should have a footnote that's saying that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. You're just assuming it.
Well,
it doesn't make it clear that, hey, by the way, this is only for this time, and it's only for this place. You're just assuming that.
It's not saying this is still.
I don't know how does that make it even more just, because I think no matter when and where that law was for, it's an unjust law. But even if it was more just, it doesn't make it clear at all anywhere. It's just like the unjust in the Qur'an. For example, the Qur'an says like there's a part of the Qur'an that says if your wife doesn't listen to you, first don't talk to them, then abandon them from your bed if they don't listen to you, and eventually hit them if your wife doesn't listen to you. That's in the Qur'an, and then the Muslims are like, oh, you're supposed to hit them with this very thin stick that doesn't really hurt. First of all, it doesn't say that. You're just assuming that to make it sound better. Second of all, I don't know how beating your wife is just, no matter what you're using to hit them with. But then I just feel like there are these things in the scripture that people of their faith just know that this is wrong, and they just make it sound better by making these assumptions about those specific texts that is not written there. So and for example, like you say, like it says kill the gay people, and
it doesn't say kill the gay.
It does, it says kill gay people. Oh, okay, it says kill people that commit gay activities, right?
It also says.
But from that,
there's also punishment of death for many of the things.
Yes.
That I commit on a daily basis, that I do all the time, that all Christians do, right?
Yeah.
So this is like what we're looking at here is like, does the Bible say that homosexual acts are wrong? Yes, it does, right? There's no dancing around that, right? But because what we have as Christians, what we're supposed to do, what God expects of us to do is live a disciplined life, because God has said that sexuality is a good thing. He Himself created sex.
Oh, there's a lot of sex in the Bible.
Right, but God has said that sexuality is to be expressed in these restrictions, to be in a heterosexual monogamous marriage.
Yeah.
That's the only way sex is supposed to happen. So the thing is, like, the person who engages in homosexual behavior is in the same boat as people, Christians who have sex outside of marriage, right?
Or people that eat pork or shellfish.
Pork. Those are ceremonial laws, right? Those
You're
are.
not supposed to eat shellfish.
you're not supposed to eat shellfish if you're about to like go into the temple, or like it would make you unclean, right? Like how you approach God. So these are ceremonial laws. There's a difference between.
Does it say that? I find it just says like it's an abomination if you eat anything from the sea that doesn't have what is it? Specific kind of seafood, which includes shrimp and
lobster.
Lobster. Yeah. It says it's an abomination. Don't eat it.
When's the last time you had lobster?
I don't know.
Are you a big fan of lobster?
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
You have had it?
Oh yes.
Well, it's as bad as committing a gay crime, according to the Bible.
Well, what?
So why did you? Why would I? Did you had lobster when you had lobster? Did you know about this verse in the Bible?
Yeah.
So why did you have lobster?
Well, I'll tell you. Because first we have in the New Testament, Jesus declares all foods clean because he says it's not what
the
goes.
New Testament.
Well, I'll explain the whole story. I'm not gonna dance around it. Right?
Okay.
Jesus said like it's not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of his heart. Like it's these things we don't eat things that make us not clean. It's actually like what's inside of us that makes us unclean. In the Old Testament, there were civil and ceremonial laws. Like for example, you couldn't touch a corpse and then like go into the temple, right?
Yeah.
But it's not a sin to bury someone. It's not evil to bury someone.
Yeah.
There's no morality involved in it, right? Also, like for example, a woman who was menstruating, right?
Yeah.
She had to be washed and had to wait a certain amount of days
just touch her
before she could go into the temple, right?
Yeah.
And so it was setting up how people were to approach God in the temple in Israel, right? And so, but there's nothing evil about these things. Like as we know, if I eat lobster or if I eat any kind of shellfish, there's no moral decision here. I'm not like deciding if it's a moral thing.
No, it does. If it says it's an abomination.
But hold on, right? But if I were to say who I sleep with, there's a moral decision there. Who I have sex with, there's a moral thing there. So there's a difference between a moral law and a civil and ceremonial law. And so Jesus, what he did is he declared all foods clean. Because like when Jesus died, there was a curtain in the temple, which was where the Holy of Holies was. Only the chief priest could go in there, right? When Jesus died, that curtain ripped. And so what that symbolizes is that all people can approach God. Like, and we don't have to go through these civil and ceremonial cleanings and washings.
So what was the point of the rule? Okay, let me go back to that first of the gay crime, the committing gay acts.
Sure. But I also want to say, like, committing heterosexual acts doesn't get you into heaven or get you into God's presence.
No, I never said. I
you know what I mean?
That
like,
Bible covers that, but
it's just that God has been very clear on how sexuality is to be expressed.
Yeah, and it puts gay thoughts in your head, and it says ignore those, even though you're born with it. Like, you know. Okay,
yeah, we're all born with many things that we have to fight against. You know, if we're going to be in relationship with God, we're all born with certain desires that we have to live a disciplined life to try to.
If there is a God, but let me just point to what you're doing with that verse that says kill not gay people, kill people that commit homosexual acts. You're looking at that and it says like, okay, kill them and it's their own fault. But you're looking at that as like, okay, I'm going to take part of it and I'm going to explain the other one, explain away the other parts.
The punishment?
You're going to say, I look at this, and this clearly is showing to me that committing homosexual acts is wrong.
Yeah.
But the part that says kill them,
yeah,
that's only for that time and that place. But the part that is saying that this is wrong is for everybody at all times. Right? Why can't we treat also the gay acts doing something homosexual? Why can't we attribute all of that to that specific time and specific place? Why can't we say like, well, if killing them is for a specific time and a specific place, which I'm not saying it makes it more just, but why can't we say, okay, well then being gay or committing homosexual acts was also wrong only for the people of Israel
Right.
at that time.
Yeah.
So why can't we do that?
I think that's a legitimate question. It's a good question. It needs to be answered, right?
Okay.
Because if like it's true, like we are taking some parts of the Bible, the punishments for these crimes, and saying, we can't expect that Christians to to enforce these punishments today.
Yeah.
And think about how ridiculous that would be in our world today if we ran around trying to stone people who took the Lord's name in vain or whatever, right? Like,
yeah.
But today,
to me, okay.
But today we still stand up for these things, right?
Yeah.
We still say it's wrong to commit homosexual acts if you are in relationship with Jesus, right? It's wrong to blaspheme the name of God because of who He is. But we don't stone these people. We don't try to enact any kind of punishment on them. But that's because we live in a different culture. We live in a different system, right? At this time, God was setting up a people of God to be a light to the nations, to be a people that lived differently than the whole world. Like if you look at a lot of the laws, like we have a lot of people question laws, for example, like not to wear clothing made of 2 different fibers. Like I myself, like I'm wearing cotton, and I'm sure there's polyester in here. This is actually wrong because I'm not to mix these things or to plant in your field.
What's the point of these laws?
Well, I'm gonna quickly try to take a shot at that.
Okay.
Just give my best shot at it.
Okay.
And for example, we have don't plant 2 different kinds of crops in the field, right?
Mhm.
It's not to mix, mixing things, right? And and that's exactly what God called the people of Israel to be, a culture that didn't mix with the populations around them, right? To be a separate people, to be a very different people.
The Jews are not supposed to marry, for example, other people.
Right, not to but they did, like many.
But they're not supposed to.
No, what they're not supposed to do is to mix with these cultures and to take on their beliefs, right?
Yeah.
We have many people in the Bible, many people even in the genealogy of Jesus and David that actually weren't born Jews, right? We have many people come from mixed marriages, The point is, Israel is called to be this culture that didn't mix with other cultures. They were very regimented, and so to be a people of God that was separate and holy, so to be seen by the rest of the world, to introduce God to the rest of the world, that was their job. And so to do this, they had a very strict system of law that would, as you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of laws, right? From what they eat to what they wear to who they sleep with, etc., etc. And so why don't we throw it all out today, right? Why don't we throw the whole Old Testament out? That's because we can still see how God wants us to live, right? But we can't enact punishment on these people, on the rest of the world, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? And so that we don't do anymore because we don't live in a theocracy anymore. The reason that we can still see that certain things the reason we can see that there's a difference between we don't punish for these moral offenses anymore is because Jesus says, Jesus came to fulfill the law, so we no longer follow the civil and ceremonial laws.
Yeah.
Like I can bury somebody and I can still come to church.
Mm-hmm.
I can do this because I can approach God, or like if a woman is menstruating, she can still come to church and she can still approach God. That's because we live in a different time now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we can still see that things like committing homosexual acts or having sex outside of marriage, we can still see that these things are still wrong in the same way that we can look at the Ten Commandments and say, well, murder's so wrong. We're not throwing that out. Like we're not throwing theft. We're not throwing that out.
What was the point of those laws then? What was the point of killing people that commit homosexual acts let's just go with one of the most insane ones in my opinion.
Okay.
When 2 men are fighting.
Yeah.
If this is in the Bible.
Oh, I think I know where you're going. Where the woman grabs his genitals. Is that where you're
Well,
going?
yeah, I'm just gonna say it.
Okay.
So when 2 men are fighting,
Yeah.
if the wife of one man comes and tries to save her husband, and by accident she touches her husband's genitals while trying to save him, we're supposed to cut off her hand and show her no pity.
I'm pretty sure that it's actually that she helps her husband by attacking the other guy.
No,
Isn't that what it is?
no.
Okay.
I know the Bible more than you.
Let's talk about the book of Nahum then. If you know the Bible better than me.
No. Just this part of it. Okay. No. She touches her own husband's private parts, and we're supposed to cut her over her hand. So I'm assuming you don't think we should do that to everybody.
Yeah, no, I don't.
First of all, I don't understand why this rule. How often did that happen? That they need to like, David, that's happening too often. We need to come up with a rule for it, right?
Well, I'm actually just reading a book right now about where the guy has a little section devoted to that law, and he's trying to make a case that says that we're just kind of our modern interpretations on that verse are just a little wrong side. I'm not in a position I can really comment on that now because like I'm in the middle of reading about this right now.
Okay.
What he's trying to say is that he doesn't believe that it's actually prescribing to cut off the woman's hand, that it's something else.
But that's what we always do.
He's just trying to say that the woman has shamed him, so then the woman needs to be shamed as well. Because the thing is, there's one law. Like
she was trying to say.
I know I can't really comment because I'm not even that familiar with the verse. Like,
yeah.
So that's one I can't really do right now. But
I could look into it. They're same kind of.
But let me say this before you go any further. Like for that issue there, I'd be very happy to look into it a couple days, and if you give me a couple days.
Yeah.
But let me say this: there's one verse that almost everybody knows from the Bible. Is everybody knows an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Like a lot of people can quote this verse, right?
Okay.
So everybody knows this verse. But what does this mean? What's this talking about, right? And what it's saying is the punishment needs to fit the crime, right? If I gouge out your eye,
but we didn't before you go to there, we didn't make the point of what.
Just follow me for 1 second. I promise I'm going there.
Okay.
So I'm saying like everybody knows that if I pluck out your eye, that equal punishment for me should be I should lose my own eye, right? Or that what's
not something we do in the justice system.
Right. But the point is that the punishment needs to fit the crime. If you poke out my eye, the response should not be that I murder you and your whole family, right? This doesn't make any sense, right? Or that if I do a small crime,
that was obvious. We didn't need the Bible to tell us.
Right. And so, but the Bible is making it very clear that for all the other crimes, the punishment must fit the crime. It can't be outwardly crazy. So if I'm looking at this,
is that New Testament?
No, this is Old Testament verse that says the punishment must fit the crime, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? And so this idea that if someone would touch a guy's genitals, cut her hand off, I would just say that, there's more going on here. Like we can't just pick a one verse out of the Bible and go, man, this is some craziness, right? Like the whole Bible is meant to be read together and in context.
Well, no, yeah, but a lot of times atheists are accused of taking verses out of context. But I think when you put things,
Christians do the same thing.
Yeah.
Christians, yeah.
Yeah, but the thing is that when you put things in context, it actually sometimes it makes less sense, and sometimes you find more contradictions when you put things in context, in my opinion. Like, I would see that as a contradiction. You would say, like, okay, the God in one verse said, like, do this, and that sounds horrible, but somewhere else says, like, the punishment should fit the crime. I don't see this as fixing that one. I see this as a contradiction. It doesn't mean, like, you can't just say, like, okay, if somebody don't listen to me there, because now I said this here.
That's not what's happening. I'm just saying that if you're, because this verse, I'm just saying I'm not familiar enough with it, right?
Yeah.
And I wish I was a little bit more for this opportunity, but one thing I can know is that there's an overall general rule in the Old Testament and New Testament.
Yeah, but that's a contradiction with it. That doesn't fix all the unjustness of the Bible. That just contradicts all the unjustness of the Bible.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that on a case basis.
Let's talk about the ones that you do know.
Okay.
Right? Like the rules that you're not supposed to wear certain clothes, and you're saying that was for a certain time, and then it doesn't apply anymore. What was the point of those rules? What was the whole point? Like something that any person, like even you find them silly, right? That's why you say.
Well, I don't find them silly, right? I definitely don't find them silly. But these rules were meant to make a people, because the thing is, like I was saying earlier, Israel didn't have walled off borders. People were allowed to leave, right? They were allowed to leave at any time they wanted. It wasn't a prison state, right? But so these laws were set to say that if
So
you're
it's like my house, my rules, you don't like it, get out of here. Kind of like that.
I don't necessarily agree with that. But
It's not that easy to leave a city.
Well, it's not easy, right? But if you don't want to be a part of the people of God, to be a light to the nations, to be a part of Israel, because Israel is a very special nation, right? Called for a purpose, right? They were like rescued out of Egypt and out of slavery to be this people that were going to be a light to the nations. And if you couldn't live within these rules, you were very welcome to leave, right? You knew what the punishment for these things were, so nobody's forcing you to stay. But the reason that these laws were so serious is because Israel had to be very radically different. We know, all of us know that we're very easily influenced by other cultures, other people. You know what I mean? Like we see it all the time. And so Israel was called to be very adamantly against mixing with other cultures.
Okay, but if I'm writing a book that's supposed to be for all mankind at all times.
Yeah. Once again, if it's you.
If a just God would write it,
okay,
I would not put the rules in there that was supposed to be for specific people at a specific time. I would be like, hey, some people might take this seriously and try to apply it at other times that I didn't attend to, which I forgot to mention somewhere, anywhere, that hey, this is not for all people. This is for this place and this time. If you're not at this place and at this time, please ignore these rules. It doesn't say that anywhere, right? And it should have. If it
we should never ignore.
Well, yeah, okay. But the thing is that if you're writing a book that's supposed to be the moral guide, and you say it has different purpose, but a lot of Christians would disagree with that. But if you're writing a book that's supposed to be a moral guideline to all men at all time, you would not say in it, kill people that commit homosexual acts and then expect people to figure it out that they're not supposed to do that later. You know what I mean?
Well, I haven't just made this idea up, right? Like I haven't just created this as a way to get out of this, right?
Yeah.
Like you can, if you read the Bible and understand the story of the Bible, like the Bible is a story of God's people, of God entering into history and God's people. Like if you read this is just because the verse that you're looking for, which would be a verse that you would write that said, hey, don't worry about these punishments anymore. Just because that's not there doesn't mean that the concept isn't there.
Where does it make it clear that this is not for everybody?
Well, Jesus makes it clear that the civil and ceremonial laws.
Well, how does it make it clear? How does Jesus make it clear?
Because of what I said earlier about Jesus said it's not what goes.
So the Ten Commandments basically doesn't apply at all times either, because we have the New Testament.
No, I definitely don't agree with that because Jesus is not throwing out the Old. He's not throwing out the Old Testament. He's not throwing out the Ten Commandments. Jesus still says like not a single word from the law will be erased, right? No one.
Well, isn't the law
these punishments are the what you're really talking about. You're not really talking about like the moral laws.
So you're saying,
you don't have any problem with saying like murder is wrong, right?
No.
Like murder's still wrong today. Theft is still wrong today. Adultery is still wrong today. These things are still wrong.
Adultery is still wrong today?
Yeah, wouldn't you think that adultery is
wrong? If you define adultery as having sex before marriage, I don't think people see it as wrong today.
When I'm saying adultery, I'm talking about like, if you enter into a bond of marriage and you cheat on your wife.
Some people have open relationships and they are married and have sex with other people, and that's considered adultery. But if some people, if they're in an open relationship, they don't consider that as wrong.
Well, I'm fine. I know that a lot of people don't consider lots of things that are wrong in the Bible. Like the Bible is written.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like there are some things that are obvious that are like everybody accepts.
But I mean, you're not saying you don't think that as Christians, since we don't punish people for certain laws, that we don't think that like murder and.
No, but if the Old Testament says you're supposed to kill somebody that commits adultery, and Jesus says, I'm not going to throw out the old laws, you're not supposed to throw out the old laws.
Right.
The law is that you're supposed to kill somebody. The Old Testament says that the law is that you're supposed to kill somebody that commits adultery. That's part of the law. So if Jesus said don't throw it away, then why are we throwing it away?
Well, we're still not throwing it away. Like we're not. That's not what's happening. We're not enforcing laws because this is not our.
But enforcing the law is part of the law.
We don't have the
That's a guideline. And God said, like, if somebody commits a homosexual act, kill them. And that asking to kill them.
If I take any piece of literature, like anything, right? If I take the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example, right? The first question I have to say is like, who is this written to, right? Who's the audience? You know, where do these ideas come from, right? I can't just pick up the Odyssey today, and you know, and go, this doesn't make any sense. Like I don't understand this book. You know, you have to understand who.
But that was not meant to be a guideline for humanity. That was just a form of entertainment.
Okay, then take any book that was taught to teach morals or humanity. Take any book in history. Like I don't pick up any book. I don't pick up the Qur'an and go, the Qur'an has to make sense to me today. I have to first understand who are they speaking to. You know, what did they think?
But the thing is that the Muslims don't have a problem with you saying that this applies to every Christian.
Anybody who, my only point is, anybody who really reads literature understands you have to look at it through the eyes of the intended audience first.
The audience is, okay, if this is a book written by God, okay, the audience is whoever reads it.
That's
right?
not true, because we don't believe that like the Bible fell from heaven. Like we believe that God chose certain people in a certain time and a certain culture to write his book. We don't think that, like, as Christians, we don't think that God dictated the book of the Bible. We think that God inspired it.
So if God inspired it, does that mean there could be mistakes in there?
I would first ask, that depends on what you mean by a mistake. Like what do you mean by that?
Like things that are wrong. Like God, maybe God has nothing against homosexual acts. Maybe somebody got inspired wrong. Maybe somebody.
No, I'm one who believes like the Bible is infallible in what it teaches, in what it teaches in its message, right?
Well, but apparently you're saying that the message is not very clear. Apparently, like you're saying, it's sending the right message, but to understand the message, we have to make this whole bunch of assumptions of. This is for this people, but this is for all people. This applies at this time, but this one does say in the Bible do this, but Jesus at the other time said that this doesn't apply, this part applies. It seems like an enigma that you have to solve just to be able to get the simplest messages out of there. Like this is not a very clear way for God to communicate with us.
Well, I just personally, I'm not gonna lie. The Bible is not the easiest book on the planet to read. It's because the seeking after God is not the easiest thing in the world. Like this.
Well, for a person that wants people to believe in Him, why does He communicate with us in riddles? Why does
I don't think that God communicates to us.
The Bible is like, it seems like a puzzle that you have to solve, and even at you as a Christian that believe in Him, you still don't know which part, you still claim not to know which parts are literal and which parts are not, right?
Oh no, I feel that what's literal and what's not is pretty clear.
How do you know which parts are literal and which parts? Do you believe in Noah's, like the Noah's Ark, that actually happened?
I'm open to that.
So you don't know. You're saying you're open to it. So you're.
No, I think that like I believe Noah's Ark is a real thing. I believe that there was a real flood. Whether or not I believe that flood was localized, like in the known world at the time, or was a global flood,
okay.
I'm open to either. Like I think but if you're asking how
Adam and Eve, and Eve coming from Adam's rib, did that really happen?
Well, the rib means side, right? Like that's what it means.
No, but the whole tree and the apple.
Like, do I think Eden was a real place and Adam and Eve were real people?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
And so those things actually happened.
Yeah, I think those are historical events. Whether or not the other things that we add on to those things, I'm open to the evidence. Like a lot of people would think that Adam and Eve might have been chosen out of a population.
But you also believe in evolution.
I would say that I'm agnostic towards evolution, just because I'm not fully educated in evolution, but I'm very open to the evidence. And I think evolution and Christianity, there's no.
Does that not contradict Adam and Eve? Evolution does not contradict Adam and Eve?
Not if Adam and Eve were chosen out of a population. Like I was just at a lecture last.
So they were not the first men.
I'm not saying because I have my personal views.
Yeah.
But you can accept these things. Like we have very famous Christian scientists who are fully accept evolution. Like Francis Collins is a very famous Christian scientist.
How is not the story?
Like evolution is not a barrier to belief in God.
not necessarily to believe in God, but to believe, to the literal belief in Adam and Eve, it is. Right? If you believe that the story of Adam and Eve is a metaphor, then that's not contradictory
Yeah,
to
I definitely
evolution.
I don't see anything in Adam and Eve to think that it's a metaphor.
All right. Well, if it's
but
not a
think about-
metaphor, then that is contradictory to the story, to the evolution.
Well, if you're gonna look at Genesis 1 and 2, like what I was saying earlier is like, because that's where you have God creating the universe and creating Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
Genesis 1 and 2. And so if you're gonna look at that, like I was saying earlier, you don't look at it with how we would want creation of the world account to be formatted. You have to look at who are these people. Like this was written, you realize this was written about thousands of years ago.
It was written thousands.
And so
of years
it's
ago.
not a book. It's not a book with a like what Genesis. I think Genesis 1 is something like 30 verses or something like that, right?
Mhm.
And so we're not going to look at it as a science textbook. The Bible is not a science textbook at all, right? And so the Bible, in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, the author is not concerned at all with how these things are materially made. There's not that it's not providing an account of how how humans are formed. We don't really think that like God took dust and like made humans. Like what does that really mean? So we have to say, what's this story telling, right? Who are the people he's speaking to? What's the story really trying to say? Is Genesis 1 and 2 trying to say how are humans made, or is it really trying to say what humans are? They're two different things, right?
Mhm.
Like how do we relate with God? What does it mean to be human? Or how are humans made? They're very different concerns. And so
what's the point then? If it's not trying to tell us,
I would say that
if I read that and it says like God did this in day 1, God did this in day 2. You're saying it's not trying to tell us how the universe was created, but if you read it, it's pretty obvious that it is. That's what it's trying to tell you. It's trying to tell you this is how God created the universe. And
I would say that when I read Genesis 1 and 2, and what lessons am I getting from it? I'm getting that God made it. I'm getting that God made it out of nothing, right? I'm getting that God made us from dust, and the dust will return. We're mortal people, right?
but
God makes Eve from Adam's side, so it's like
based on Genesis,
Yeah.
our planet Earth was created before the stars.
Right.
And if you have any sense of
Things were going out. They had days even before the sun, right? The sun.
we had
some
planets on Earth before the sun.
Right. So we've got some interesting things going on there. And so what's going on? Do you really think that the Bible? Because the thing is, the people thousands of years ago would have probably asked the same questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, they're not dumb. They understand that the days had to do with the rotation of the sun, right? The sun comes up, sun goes down. That's a day, right? And so
No, that's not my problem. That's a problem, but that's not as big as a problem as Earth being created before the stars.
Right. You're trying to say that like it doesn't make sense materialistically.
And you're saying it's not supposed to.
And you're trying to say that the Bible is not a science textbook, and I'm trying to say the same thing.
No, I'm not just saying that. I'm saying even if it's not, it doesn't have to be a science textbook for it to be contradictory to what we know about it. Maybe the purpose of it is not to be a science textbook. Still, it could be completely wrong and could be completely against everything we know about the universe and still not be a science textbook. But it's telling us how the universe was created. And it's giving us the orders of it. And if you believe in that literally, and if you don't think that it's a metaphor, then you should accept that everything that we know science has proven to us about our universe is wrong. If you believe in those in Genesis literally.
No, I wouldn't agree at all. Like I was saying earlier, like the Bible was like inspired by people in a certain time, right, to write a story about God and how He relates to His people, right? And so just because
it's a metaphor.
So I wouldn't say that it's a metaphor. Like I think that's going too.
So what does it mean?
But is there imagery there? Of course there is, right?
So what does it mean? What does it mean when God created the planet Earth first and stars after? Is that true or not?
I don't see why. I don't see why not? Like if we can understand like certain, well first we can't, I would just even just go with days. Like God says there was days.
No, well, let's focus on that one. Because days, we could redefine days as a period of time, okay? But this one, where Earth was created first,
well,
and stars were
you'd have
created
to show me.
second.
You'd have to show me that specific one because I don't know.
What happened? Day one. Day one, God let there be light. Day two.
Yeah, there was light before there was the sun. Right? That's
well, I could see why there could be light before the sun. It could be coming from other stars or something, or anything, or any kind of explosion in space. But why could there be stars before there's Earth? That can't be right. But could there be plants on Earth before there's the sun? That doesn't make any sense. And for the gymnastic argument around that, which gives you is basically that's a metaphor.
I would just say that like to try to impose modern science on a story written to a certain people at a certain time doesn't make any sense.
Okay, if that would be true, if that story was not written by an all-knowing God.
It was written by human beings.
Well, it was supposed to be inspired by God.
Right.
So you're saying it could be wrong. Because it was not written by God,
that's what
because it was inspired by humans, there could be mistakes in the Bible.
Well, not in what the Bible is teaching and the message what it's teaching, right? Like, for example, right?
Well, okay, not the message, but there could be wrong. The eventual message could be good.
Like, for example,
but there could be things in the Bible that are wrong.
Like, I believe in the Bible is infallible. Like, there's no mistakes in the Bible. But the Bible says that a bat is a bird, for example, right? And so that doesn't make any sense, right? Because we know that it's not, right? And so, but I have no problem with that because I understand that the Bible is written by certain people in a certain time. And so I can't expect God to have taken every biblical author and said, okay, let me teach you about quantum mechanics, let me teach you about zoology.
So because of that, there could be mistakes in there.
There could be mistakes like that, but that doesn't affect the message of God.
Okay, my point is for you to admit that the message, you're saying that the final message, the point is of the Bible, what it's trying to achieve is not wrong. But there are mistakes in there. There are things.
Well, I just said I have no
there
problem.
are things that are against what we know about the universe in there. Even though the final goal, the final.
Bible isn't speaking about the universe.
It is when the Bible says that this is how God created the universe. It's not talking about the universe.
That's not what God is saying. God isn't saying this is how I created the universe.
In
Genesis 1 and 2 is saying this is who God is and how.
In Genesis 1 and 2, God is not talking about how He created the universe. No. That's what people when you talk about Genesis 1 and 2, that's what people associated with the most. After Adam and Eve and the tree and everything, the story of creation. Genesis 1 is the story of creation.
So when you read Genesis 1, what do you come out of it with? Because when I come out of Genesis 1, I say, okay, God made everything.
But
right?
Okay,
God
so
brought order to
you're being selective picking. You're cherry picking.
What
right?
would you say?
Is not only saying that God created everything, it's also saying how God created everything. It is clearly saying that. And for you to ignore one part of it, the part that says how God created the universe, and only take the part, that message that God created the universe, you're basically looking at the scientific information out there and seeing that some part of it is contradicting it, and just ignoring it or trying to argue that you using gymnastic arguments.
Well, let me ask you what you think about this. Like in Genesis 1, it talks about like God separated the waters below from the waters above, right? God says that, right? And now we know there's no ocean up there, there's no waters above, right? It's water in the clouds, but what's that talking about, right?
That is vague enough for us to be able to say whatever we wanted to say.
My point is, there wasn't anybody in that time that didn't think there were waters above. Like God is talking to a people in a certain time. He's not giving them lessons. He's not walking in and giving them lessons on,
Yeah, but he was wrong. I accept that the people at that time. The fact
God isn't going in and teaching people modern science, 21st century science.
But the fact that God was not trying to teach science to people at that time doesn't make the statements any less wrong.
So if, like, for example, if like you were to walk up, if you and me go in a time machine and we go hang out with Paul, who's an author of one of the authors of the New Testament, and we say, Paul, what do you think about quantum mechanics? And
I wouldn't tell them about.
And Paul were to say, I don't know.
Yes. Okay. That's a good point. If I go to olden times and if I understand that they have a very limited understanding of the universe, I wouldn't try to teach them about quantum mechanics and the black holes and where the universe and Big Bang and stuff. But I wouldn't also give them false information.
Like which one? What do you think is false?
The Genesis story of creation is false. You should the fact that you're saying that God wasn't trying to teach them about the science of the universe means that you also believe that this information is false.
I think that it's just you can't go. It doesn't make any sense to me that like you would try to.
The only reason why you're saying that this doesn't make any sense for us to attribute this to a scientific view of the creation is because you now know that these are wrong. If you didn't know about modern science and you read that book, you would clearly think that this is the story of creation. If you believed in the Bible, you would say this is the story of creation. This is how the universe was created. But now, because you know that contradicts what we know about the universe. You're trying to re-explain the purpose of it. In fact, the purpose of it is clearly, I think, whoever wrote that.
But this is not something that's done in the face of modern science. Like we have St. Augustine, even in the 8300s, saying that we're not held to any kind of that we can understand. Like Genesis 1 is not this literal explanation, right? This has never been the stance of the Christian.
You just said they are not metaphors.
Yeah, because I just think metaphors is the wrong word.
What's the right word?
I think
if they're not literal, they're metaphors. How could they be anything else?
Because, for example, when you say like Adam's rib, like this means side, right? So we say like Eve was made from Adam's side. I don't think anybody's saying like, because to be a metaphor, I would say like she is Adam's side. Like what is going on here is this imagery, right? To say that like Eve was made as a helper for Adam to be like his.
Then it's a metaphor. That's the definition of a metaphor.
That's what we call like a better, like we say like women are better halves. You know what I mean? Like that's where it comes from, right?
Oh, you just turned a story that is intended to say that women are less than men, and you turned it on its head and says like women are the better halves of men.
The Bible would never ever say that women are less.
The Bible is like, in my view. Clearly anti-female.
Before the Bible, the Bible is the book when it comes to equality among the sexes. Like when you want to look at like who fought for women's rights.
Okay,
this is all from the Bible.
That's another argument that Muslims make too, and it says like they compare the Qur'an rules to the time before it, and they call it was called the time of ignorance, right? And they're like, the Qur'an is so much better than that because at that time they used to bury their daughters, right? So it's such an improvement. But if that's your standard, that's not a very high bar to be a better.
Well, I would just say that in regards to women in the Bible.
In the Bible, it says
until the Bible, right? There was no book, there's no teaching out there that
said you're bringing
that women are equal, right? As we actually see from Genesis 1 and 2 that women were actually created as the crown jewel of creation because we see human beings as created.
You're looking at other people and then you're saying the Bible was better than that. But I'm saying those other people before that's not a very high standard to be better. Yes, so being better than that is not that big of a deal to be proud of.
No, I'm just saying that like
if you look at compared to our secular morality today, that we have, which we were trying to like make women be completely equal to men. The Bible has.
Well, I would say that's true in Western, like our modern Western culture.
Well, me and you, both of us, I think, consider that's right.
Yeah.
For women are completely equal, right?
Right.
Wherever they believe.
But I would say, especially as a Christian, I fight for that women are equal.
Well, that's against the Bible.
That's not against the Bible.
And the Bible says that the women should not teach, should not hold authority They should not raise their voice. They should learn in silence. Right? That's the teaching of the Bible. And also the teaching of the Quran is also anti. How is that?
I really think.
How do you read as in Timothy, right?
Yeah.
If you read that, how do you say that that's a book that promotes equality between them?
Because until the Bible, there was no
Is that
book.
New Testament or Old Testament?
Yeah, Paul wrote that.
Okay.
And so, but Paul's also the one who said like there's no male or female, there's no Jew or Greek, all are one in Christ Jesus.
Let's focus on the part that Paul says that women should basically shut the hell up and learn.
No, that's not what's happening. You're putting your own interpretation.
Alright, well, that's why you're here, to clarify it.
So, because what I'm saying is, like earlier we were talking about how Christians cherry pick, atheists cherry pick, and I think in this instance you're cherry picking. Well, you have to read.
Atheists.
The Bible is
okay.
The Bible is one story, right? It's a whole story, right? And so just because like we see things in the Bible, if you just want to talk about this one thing, I personally would say that this is Paul speaking to the church at the time, right? Like I think that's Paul's. These are Paul's. This is what Paul is prescribing for the church at the time. So, like that's what I think is going on there.
Again,
Paul's a champion of people's rights.
Alright, first of all, I'm going to have something. Again,
like we're gonna have. I gotta say we're gonna have a hard time.
But you say atheists cherry pick, but atheists should. I mean, when it comes to Christians cherry picking, right? If God is perfect, if God is all knowing and all wonderful and everything, right? You can't cherry pick.
Right.
Everything has to be good. If you're an atheist, or if you're anybody that is trying to indicate that your God is not just or all loving and all kind, you just need one example. So you can, from that position, you can cherry pick. Because even if it's all good, you just need one example of God being unjust to basically oppose the whole thing. So from that position, when you are claiming that when you claim your God cannot make mistakes, then one example is good enough. But when you're claiming from your position, from the Christian position, you can't cherry pick because everything has to be good. So cherry picking, I think, for an atheist is allowed.
But I would also say
another thing, for Paul being a champion of equality, again, you're doing the same thing with that you do with the punishment for homosexual act, and this is in the New Testament, so we don't have the excuse that the New Testament overrules the Old Testament rules. Because first of all, Paul is saying something that we both me and you would probably see as unjust, and the way to explain that is do gymnastic arguments around that, is to say that that's for specific people at a certain time. How do you know that? How could you tell that some rules in the Bible? How do you figure when you see these things in the Bible? How do you decide that some of them are for a specific time and a specific place, which doesn't make it even more just, but let's say it does? How do you decide that? How do you figure? I think you use your own morality. You use your own moral standards, which in my opinion is higher than the moral standards of the Bible. And if they meet your moral standards, you say this is for all people at all times. And if they don't meet your moral standards, you say these are for specific people at a certain time. So, how do you use?
Well, first I'd say, like, as Christians, like, when we become Christians and say, we've been Christian for 6 months or 6 years or whatever, like the Christian life and theology is something we wrestle with. It's not just revealed to us the day that we become Christians. Like we wrestle with these issues. Because as far as women in leadership, like for example, my church doesn't allow women to be elders and doesn't allow women to be pastors. Right? But then we have other denominations who we get along with just fine, sit at the same table, and we're in the same family, right? That they allow women to do these things, right?
But Christians do it.
Okay, so Christian theology, like in the details of Christian theology, first off, like these don't have to do with whether God exists or not. I could be completely wrong in my theology, but then we still have great arguments for God's existence. When we wrestle with Christian theology, we're trying to get to know God better, and that's what it is. The Christian life is a process, and it's a wrestling match. And so when we see a verse in the Bible, like when we read the Bible, we read this book about equality, and we love the position of women, then we see something happen in the Bible that like disrespects women, or what we have to ask what's going on there. We have to wrestle with it, we have to understand the context, the time period, the purpose. Like it's a wrestling match, and it's a search. It's not just, wait, there's a verse, man, God must not exist, sign me up for atheism, and I'm on the internet tomorrow fighting somebody, right? Like these are things we wrestle with. And so the Christian position is a humble position, because like me, like I didn't know the answers to lots of things last year, and there's tons of things I don't know the answer to now that I will next year. Yeah. You know, so to be asked to like answer every question of Christian theology, I can't do it, right? Yeah. Like what we have to do is like I have personal opinions that I share with a community that we wrestle with together, and we try to understand.
But here's what you just said you do. You read the Bible.
Yeah.
And then when you get to a part that doesn't make any moral sense, you struggle with it. But then the parts that meet your moral standards,
I would say
easily go through.
What I would say is last year, for example, I read something and I'm like, man, what is going on here? It doesn't make sense. I can't believe God acted like this. I didn't know anything about this before. It was a surprise to me. But then through wrestling with it for a few months now, I feel I fully understand it.
You justify it.
Like for example, a famous thing among atheists and famous atheists is to talk about like God is a terrible moral person because he slaughtered the Canaanites, right? Like that the Jews came in and took the promised land from the Canaanites. And I was like, man, I remember when I was reading that, I was like, you know what, maybe these guys are right. Like I didn't even know God did this, right? Did God commit genocide here? What's really going on here, right? Yeah. And so through searching and trying to like reading about Canaanite culture, through reading that God kept his people in Israel for like 400 years because he was still waiting for giving the Canaanites a chance to turn around. There was a lot more to the story than just reading a few verses. Like that's why we wrestle with these things. And so just because I may not understand something today doesn't mean that after a process I won't.
Well, give me
so when I see a verse, right? When I see a verse that I don't necessarily agree with today, right? That I go, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. There's lots that I don't agree with God. Like if I like what I would prefer is I would like God to allow me to sleep with all the women that I would like to. Why wouldn't he want me to do this? I don't agree with God. But then I see that God has a purpose. He says that like sex is made for to be in the barriers of a heterosexual committed marriage. And I go, okay, well, I don't necessarily agree with that because I think that life would be better a different way. I'm gonna go with God, and I'm gonna wrestle with him and try to understand it. I feel that I do understand that, right? I understand why life is
so tell me, how do you understand the stoning of homosexual people, of people that commit homosexual acts?
I understand that as there is a very serious punishment for people who want to live in Israel.
Why is that okay?
It's okay, like why is it morally permissible that they did that back then? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
It's morally permissible.
For two questions. Why is that okay, or more, whatever you said, for them to stone people that committed homosexual acts at that time? And that's one question. And second question, how do you know that was the law at that time and God is not asking you to do it now?
Well, first I would say in regards to stoning, right? For example, like stoning is capital punishment, right?
It's a very brutal way of capital.
It's capital punishment, and it's a community enacting this.
Let's get together and stone gay people.
I wouldn't say that, but I would say that it's the community acting this way, right? And so enacting the punishment, so it's like one executioner doing it, right? It's the community taking responsibility for this. I would say that it's morally permissible to do this because if you wanted to act outside of God's will, right? Mm-hmm. But you were free to leave Israel. But if you wanted to be a part of God's chosen people, a holy nation, to be a light to the world, then Israel is not the place for you.
So you're just saying that, I'm going to just restate what you said, and see if this makes any sense. Because you chose to live in Israel, it's morally acceptable if somebody slowly dies dies with a very brutal way because they committed a homosexual act. That's moral. Because they chose to live in Israel.
Like, is your problem that stoning is not it's not like lethal injection or something like that?
The whole thing, this statement, do you think this is moral? Do you think that...
Yeah, I do.
You think stoning somebody for committing...
Or do you mean
no,
capital punishment for this
no,
crime?
just this whole statement. If what year was that? I don't know. At that time, because you chose to live in Israel, it's okay, it's morally acceptable for us to stone you to death for committing a homosexual act.
Yeah.
That is acceptable.
Yeah, because like God is very clear that He was calling chosen people, right, to be a tested people, and if they didn't want to be a part of this, they are very free to leave.
Okay. I don't even know how to argue with it. I mean,
like I understand there's still people today who just like think that capital punishment is wrong.
First of all, a homosexual act doesn't harm anybody. Okay? Nobody suffers if two gay people have sex with each other.
But that's not the requirement.
Alright, no, I'm just saying what I have a problem with, right? Second of all, you're stoning people to death.
Would you choose to live in Israel at this time? Would you choose to be a part of God's chosen people?
What was the alternative? If the alternative was dying in the desert, I don't have a freaking choice.
Why would you die in the desert?
No, I don't know. I don't know what the situations are. People at that time.
If I asked you, for example, if I asked you to come be a part of my church, right?
No, but here's the thing.
Just hold on.
No, this is.
If I asked you to come be a part of my church, and I said we're a people that live a different life, right? We live a disciplined life because we're trying to be a light to the rest of the city of Vancouver. You'd probably say, I don't want to be a part of that community because that's not my goal. That's not what I want to do, right? And I don't think that the decisions that you guys make, I don't agree with them. And you choose not to be a part of our community. So I don't see how that's any different.
So therefore starting gay people...
For example, us Christians...
I just don't understand...
We have punishments as well that don't make the world can enact. Like we can actually ask somebody to leave our community. We can remove them from our community if they choose to live in a certain way, right? So like, but what this is saying, this is laying out a standard that there are very serious consequences to be a part of God's chosen people in Israel at that time, and to be a theocracy, to say that like God Himself is our King, right? And then to still act like the rest of the world. You can't do that.
It's just, I don't know how to argue because
like,
to me it's so obvious that stoning people for committing a homosexual act to death is so wrong that I don't even know how to argue against it because I see it as obvious.
Yeah, I'm not stoning anybody.
No, but you're saying it's okay.
I think it's
you're saying that there's a point, time, and a place that is stoning somebody for being gay, for committing a homosexual act, is justifiable. I'm not saying
it's justifiable.
Okay, and I think that a God that says that is anything but just, and it's anything but moral, and it's anything but kind.
I can accept that as your opinion.
Okay,
no problem.
But. Alright, let's go to the second part of this argument, that you're saying that when you see that, it's very clear to you that this is for a specific time and a specific place. How is that so clear to you?
I think that's because it's the culture, because what is God trying to do with these laws, right? Okay. Like, God gave these laws to certain people, right? And He gave them to the nation of Israel. And He loved the nation of Israel. He rescued them out of Egypt, right? He chose these people and rescued them out of Egypt because they cried out to Him, right? And He's called them to, He's very clear on what He's calling them to do, right? He's calling them to be a light to the nations, a holy people.
What does that mean, a light to the nations? Like, be an example for how to live. Okay.
Right. An example how to live, to be kind to the nations around them, and to introduce God to them.
So based on your own explanation, it seems to me that this is not the rule for specific people at a specific time. Because if these were God's chosen people for be an example of how to live to the rest of the world, that means that this law and the way of punishment is supposed to be an example to all nations at all times. Based on what you're saying, this is not a limited law for a specific people. If these are the example, if this is God's example to everybody. So killing. I would say
that the punishment so makes sense outside of a theocracy.
How do you decide? Like, what's the filter? How are you deciding that? Okay, what's wrong? I'm going to allow to everybody.
The government system, I would say that. I think that's what I would say.
Where does it say?
That's what I would take it as.
But that's what you're taking it as because you're choosing to. How is that obvious? Where does it say?
You're asking me to build a case here. I don't have a Bible here. I don't think we have a long time to sit and research these things together. But that's my understanding. I'm not just making this up, right? But it's like if we don't live in a theocracy, if we don't live in a place where we ascribe to the laws of God, if we don't, as a nation, say we're a people of God, being a light to the nations, of course we can't enact these things. Of course not. Doesn't make any sense.
Wait, what?
I can't stone people for committing homosexual acts
in
a culture that doesn't see God as its king.
Okay, so if we create our own small little community, somewhere, and we all believe in God all of a sudden, and we all believe Jesus is Lord, and that small community of ours, you're saying we could stone people that commit.
There could be a case made for that, I guess. Like, that's a big stretch, though.
And here's the thing, for that all the people that were born in Israel did not move to Israel. They were born there, right?
Yeah.
They can't really choose to just get out, right?
Yeah, you can choose to get out.
I mean, you're born with your family.
You mean it would be uncomfortable, but you left the place of your birth.
Yeah, it's easy now. Mm-hmm. It's very easy now.
Why do you think it's not as easy back then?
Because, first of all, I was born in a family that had enough to send me away. Over there, you need the support of your community. You need the support of your family. You have belongings that you can't move around. You have belongings that you can't move around. Your wealth is not. You have your camel. You have your farm. You might die from starvation if you just decide to leave. Right? It's not that easy to just leave. And if you are gay, if you're born gay, right, and if your family here. You might think you could, you could see somebody else that is gay, and you might think you could get away with it. But hey, somebody sees you, and now stone the poor fellow to death. God didn't say cut their heads off or make it a painless death. Even King Henry VIII, which we consider as a bad person, when he was cutting people's heads off, he tried to hire people that the sword was so sharp that they would die right away so that they didn't feel the pain, right? God is like, no, stone them. Make it slow and make it painful. This is not really...
I think you're adding a few words there.
Stoning to death is slow and painful. My friend's father was stoned to death.
Okay, but this is God is using people in a certain time. So
people still today stone people to death.
So stoning was a very common practice at this time. This was what was understood to be capital punishment, right? And so, I don't understand, did you want God to come in and enact new capital punishment rules? I think you're really, when you look at things like this, you can't impose your own ideas on the text. You have to look at the people at the time.
Our own ideas are definitions of the words just and kind. And to say those do not, for God is different, then we have to accept that if for God these things are different, then God is not just and kind. God is not just. The God of the Bible is not a just God, unless those things are all metaphors.
Well, you keep saying these things, right? But I don't agree with this at all. I'm not even compelled at all to believe that.
Okay.
I don't see the point. You're trying to say
Well, no. The point
you're saying that God wants people get stoned in the Bible.
No, the
therefore
point is that
God's
the
not
way
just.
the way that we got here was this. You were trying to say there's two definitions of God that we were trying to argue against. I was trying to argue against, right? One is a deistic God, which maybe the next time we're going to talk about that God, which we don't have any proof for, in my opinion, right? and we're not gonna.
I don't agree.
Okay.
So we'll have a good conversation.
Okay, we're gonna have and for that God, I'm not going to disprove that God. I'm just gonna say I'm not gonna believe in that God because I don't see any proof for it. But when it comes to the God of the Bible and the God of the Quran, we can disprove it, and that was your.
But it's not disproving something. It's not disproving God's justice to say that.
If you say God is just, and then you show that God commits unjust, that's an argument against that God.
You're just to say that like God isn't just because people get stoned for crimes in the Bible. That doesn't make any sense.
Why doesn't that make sense?
That's you saying that you personally don't agree with stoning as a moral way of enacting capital punishment, right? And but that doesn't mean that God is immoral, right? That doesn't make sense. Right? You're just saying like I don't agree with. You're trying to say I don't agree with certain forms of capital punishment.
You say this. You use the same thing against the Quran. You said like when you see God in the Quran allows men to beat their wife, you disagree with that, and you're like that's not right.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever right to beat your wife. That's
yes,
terrible.
but what you're using against the Quran, I'm doing the same thing. How is it wrong for me to do the same thing for the Bible, and it's okay for you to do that with the Quran?
Why do I say that? Because of my personal beliefs. I say that because I believe in the Bible, and the Bible says that like all people are made in the image of God, and so to disrespect the image of God in your wife is a terrible offense. It's an offense against God Himself. So that's why.
I can say that about gay people.
Yeah.
I think gay people are, if God created gay people, then gay people are an image of God. And if you're stoning gay people.
I'm not stoning anybody.
No, but I'm saying you, I don't mean
when
you.
I see,
I'm just saying
the image of God is in people who are homosexual as well. That's why like it's been a terrible mistake in the Christian community, especially in the States, to be negative towards gay
You're
people.
Supposed to. We're
not supposed to be. No way. Because no, not at all, right? Because we're all full of sin. I'm just as full of sin. What is Jesus' heart like? Doesn't even talk about homosexuality, right? But what he does talk about is things like greed and stuff like that. These are terrible.
Jesus doesn't talk about homosexuality, but the Old Testament does.
But my point
Jesus condones Old Testament.
I'm being critical of my own community. I'm trying to say that like we have crimes like homosexual. We have sins like homosexual acts that Christians as a community seem to come down so hard on these people. But yet our churches are full of sin as well. And so like that's why Christians are called to be people of love and to honor the image of God in all people. The same image of God is in the gay person down the street, as well as like the greedy businessman in my church. And so I think that there's a lot of complaints from the atheist community, or atheists in general, towards Christianity because we're so mean towards homosexuals. Like I was speaking with some young people recently who said the reason they don't want to become Christians is because that we're so mean towards gay people. And that's a mistake on the Christian church. But it's not a mistake for us to stand up and say that we don't agree with certain lifestyles.
I agree with you that you can't use what Christians do and what Muslims do. You can't use that against their God, okay? Because you could always say that, God is good, but Christians are not necessarily good, or Allah is good, but Muslims aren't necessarily good.
Happy you can see that.
Yes,
that's what a lot of.
I agree with that you can't use the morality of Muslims and Christians against their God, but I think you could use the morality of the Bible and the morality of the Quran, or the immorality of it. I think you could use that against God. Because yes, Christians could do things that they could be like, well, the crime that they committed has nothing to do with God. Like you say, like.
I agree. If you could show that God, because God claims that He's all loving. The Bible claims that God is all loving. If you could make a case from God's own words or actions or whatever to show that He's not all loving, then God would be self-contradictory and He would be justified.